11 verses 1 through 45. It can be found on page 934 of your Pew Bibles. If you've been with us throughout Lent, you may have noticed that the gospel lesson each week continues to get longer and longer, and that is something unique to this cycle through the lectionary. The gospel lessons are getting longer. It's not just your imagination. This is the seventh of 7 signs in John's gospel, signs being those miraculous events or occurrences that speak to who Jesus is and what his ministry is all about. This is the raising of Lazarus, which is found only in John's gospel, and we'll talk about this in a moment as we read here in the 11th chapter. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death, rather it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them." After saying this, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought that he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him." Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. May God's blessing be upon the hearing and the understanding of this holy word. As I was doing some research for this morning's sermon, I came across an online condolence book for an infant who passed away. In addition to many messages to the family from friends and loved ones was the following entry written by the child's mother that I'd like to share with you. She writes, "Hi, baby girl. Today you are 21 months old from when you made your entrance into this world. It has almost been 3 weeks that you grew your wings and went to heaven to be with God pain-free. I miss you every day, every second. I still can't believe you are gone. I am trying to cope with reality, the reality that I will never see your gorgeous face again. I will never see your big, bright eyes, even though you couldn't see through them. I know your heart felt how much you are loved and cared for. I know you are another angel that heaven gained. God needed another angel, and he chose you. I look forward to seeing you at the gates of heaven when my time comes. I love you more than words could ever express. You were and always will be my special angel. Your siblings always ask for you, but they know you are in heaven watching over all of us. Rest in paradise, love always and forever, Mom." Reading these words for this child of differing abilities who obviously journeyed just a short time on this earth was heart-wrenching, as you just heard. I can hear the mother's pain and sadness coming through those words, and I'm overcome with empathy for her, and yet at the same time, her words are maddening to me. God needed another angel in heaven, she writes, as if this were the gospel truth, and as matter of fact, as if we were to say that the sun is shining outside today. These are words that society throws around when someone dies too young, as if they are a comfort and will magically make everything all better. As people of faith, I believe that we have a responsibility to think through phrases like this theologically before we allow them to impact our beliefs, and certainly before we start saying them to our friends and family who are in the throes of grief and pain. So let's do a little unpacking this morning as we turn to that lesson we read from John's Gospel. So as you heard, our story begins today with Jesus getting word that his friend Lazarus has taken ill. Yet interestingly, Jesus does not rush to be by his friend's side. No, instead he stays 2 more days in the place where he was before suggesting to the disciples that they go to see Lazarus. The disciples then urge Jesus not to go back to Judea because of the hostile reaction to him there, but he insists, explaining to them that Lazarus has now died. Upon arriving, they are met by Martha and learn that Lazarus has been in a nearby tomb now for 4 days already. Martha, clearly angered at Jesus' delay in getting there, calls out Jesus, suggesting that Lazarus would have lived if he had arrived sooner. But Jesus tells her not to worry because Lazarus will rise again. And so after making their way to where Lazarus' body is laid, Jesus then orders the stone to be taken away. And despite Martha mentioning the stench of a man 4 days dead, probably to highlight the reality of his death, the stone is rolled away. Jesus then commands Lazarus to come out, and he does, leading those in attendance, according to John, to believe in Jesus because of what they have seen. Now we can read a fantastic story like this and jump to some major conclusions, can't we? The biggest of which might be that God controls who lives and who dies and when that happens, right? For Jesus clearly wanted Lazarus to die, otherwise he wouldn't have delayed in getting to him. And then he made it clear that it actually wasn't Lazarus' time to die yet by raising him. Some might be led to say that God didn't need an angel in the shape of Lazarus just yet. Now that's of course if we take this story literally, and yet I'm not so sure that we're supposed to. After all, John's Gospel is the only one to report the raising of Lazarus. This may well be a creation of his in order to make a point, and that point may be that it is a prefiguration of the death and resurrection of Jesus. And therefore, how factual this story is really is somewhat inconsequential. For in all the Gospels, extraordinary events are associated with the ministry of Jesus, and they're understood as indicative of the workings of God's power. In other words, the intent of this story may well be to show that God has the power to resurrect Jesus when he dies, and furthermore that God has the power to do the same for all of us when we die. It is to say, plain and simple, that death cannot and will not separate us from the love of God. And I honestly believe that's the sentiment behind all of those people who say God needed another angel in heaven. What they're really trying to say is that the person who died is standing witness to God's love in a new way. And while that's true, I believe it's a wholly different and wholly damaging thing to suggest that God is picking and choosing how and when people get there. Because let's play that out this morning for a moment. God picks and chooses which angels God needs in heaven. Okay, so that means that God needed 28 new angels last December in Newtown, Connecticut. No, wait, scratch that. God only needed 26 because we can't count the shooter and his mother as an angel because God couldn't love them, right? It also must mean that God needed a few new angels out in Washington State, which is why those mudslides hit. And I guess there are quite a few Sudanese refugees that qualify for angelic status. Not to mention all of those Rwandan children who are victims of genocide. Apparently, God needed quite a choir of angels from there. Perhaps there was also an angel on that Malaysian jetliner that God needed. Too bad for the other passengers, I guess. But that plane had to go down because God needed another angel in heaven. And I guess the grieving mother we began with in today's sermon should be happy with the fact that her child was beautiful enough for God to call her home, right? Which means that my child, who made it through some pretty trying times, apparently wasn't fit for angelic status just yet. So should I be happy that he wasn't right for the part, or sad that God doesn't think enough of him to make him an angel yet? You see what I mean? This is harmful, hurtful, damaging theology. It asserts that we have a God who sits in heaven, I guess, and picks and chooses who dies and when that death might be. It suggests that God destines some to live a long life and others to die young arbitrarily of what kind of life we live. And by extension, it also means that God is in the business of picking out which families should have to suffer the heartbreaking loss of a loved one. But I can't imagine, in my wildest dreams, that this is the way God works. And in fact, if this is the way that God works, then I'm not so sure that's a God I want to put my faith and trust in. A God who would arbitrarily pick and choose who dies and when? No thanks. That's not a God I want to worship. No, the God I want to worship is the one we see revealed to us through the actions of Jesus in this story, albeit in a brief mention. Do you remember what Jesus did when he got to the tomb and saw Mary and Lazarus' friends overcome with grief? He didn't immediately roll away the stone. He wept. The shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. If we're going to take anything literally from this story, then take that. Jesus wept when he saw the pain and sadness that had overcome Lazarus' friends. See how he loved him, the Jews responded when they see Jesus in tears. And the word for love they use is philia, the common everyday Greek word for friendship, human affection, deep feeling, that ordinary love that we hold for our friends. My friends, a God who would weep in love and affection when seeing others in pain is not the kind of God who is going to willingly cause such pain by picking and choosing who dies, and certainly not to fill out some morbid angelic choir based on what size robes God needs to fill. No, a God who weeps is a God who sees our suffering, understands how hard death can be on the living, laments with us, and then offers us the strength to keep going even amid such tragedy and hardship. But not only that, such a God is one who also shows us after the tears of grief have stopped falling, and we realize that our lives are not over, that something new and perhaps even hopeful can still emerge from the bondage and entombment of grief that we've experienced. In Lazarus-like fashion, new life can be resurrected in this life in the same way as it is beyond this life. And so I guess all of this is a way of saying that today my message is twofold. First, understand that God is not in the business of picking and choosing who dies and when. That's not God's role, period. And second, understanding this, we need to stop perpetuating such false and damaging platitudes. So let's stop saying them. Please don't say to someone who has lost a loved one that it was God's will, or that God needed another angel in heaven, or that God called them home. If you learn nothing else from me, learn that. Don't believe it. Don't say it. It's not going to make anybody feel any better. Instead, wrap that person in a loving embrace and hold them until the tears stop falling. Hold them and resist telling them that it will be all right, because it may not be all right. Don't say anything except "I love you and I'm here for you." Be courageous enough to sit with them in their grief and be God's hands and feet on this earth as God needs you to be. There will come a time when you can talk theology with them, but even then it may be best to just leave it at, We know that your child is wrapped up in God's loving arms right now, even if we don't know why she's gone. Because the truth is we don't know. And yet even so, we can put our faith and our trust in this. That even though God didn't call that child home, we can rest assured that God was there to greet her with open arms when she arrived. Amen.